I wouldn't do that if I were you, the quiet single dad warned then in one heartbeat. He dropped 2 armed muggers like trained soldiers. And the whole town found out the man fixing cars used to fight for his life in a cage. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun painted Cedar Ridge in shades of gold, its warm rays cutting through the autumn mist that clung to the quiet streets. In the modest Cole household, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as Danny stood by the counter, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Dad, the toaster's acting up again," Lila called out, poking at the appliance with a butter knife. Danny set his coffee down. "Careful with that," he said, gently taking the knife from her hand. "Let me have a look." "You and your fixing things," Lila laughed, rolling her eyes. "I swear, if something breaks within a 10-mile radius, it somehow finds its way to you." Danny's eyes crinkled with amusement as he unplugged the toaster and turned it over. "Nothing wrong with making things work again," he said softly, his large fingers surprisingly delicate as they adjusted the spring mechanism. "Sometimes, all something needs is a little patience and care." The kitchen was small but warm, its walls decorated with Lila's artwork from over the years, and a few faded photographs. Morning light streamed through the window above the sink, catching the silver strands in Danny's dark hair. At 45, his face carried the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered storms but kept his kindness intact. "There we go," he said, plugging the toaster back in. The bread popped up perfectly browned moments later. "My hero," Lila grinned, spreading butter on her toast. She wore her school backpack over one shoulder, her brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Though I still say we should just buy a new one. This one's got plenty of life left in it," Danny replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "Your mom picked it out, remember?" A gentle silence fell between them at the mention of Rebecca. Lila's smile softened as she watched her father, noting how his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight whenever they spoke of her mother. The drive to school was quiet and comfortable in Danny's old Ford pickup. The truck rumbled along Cedar Ridge's main street, past Morrison's Hardware and the town's single traffic light. Mrs. Thompson waved from the flower shop, and Danny raised his coffee cup in greeting. "See you after school, Dad," Lila said, hopping out at Cedar Ridge High. "Don't forget we're helping at the pantry tonight." "Wouldn't miss it," Danny smiled, watching her join her friends before pulling away. At Cole's Auto Repair, the morning unfolded like any other. Danny worked steadily, his movements precise and measured as he bent over engines and checked brake lines. The shop's radio played soft country music, mixing with the familiar sounds of tools and occasional chatter from customers. "Man, Cole, you must hit the gym every day," Mike, his younger coworker, commented during lunch break. "Those arms could lift an engine block." Danny just shrugged, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Just try to stay healthy," he said simply, turning the conversation to Mrs. Henderson's transmission problems. The afternoon passed quickly, and soon Danny was closing up shop. He changed out of his work clothes, his movements revealing the disciplined grace of someone used to controlling his body. If anyone noticed how he always seemed aware of his surroundings, or how he never made sudden movements, they didn't mention it. The church basement was warm and busy that evening. As volunteers sorted donations for the food pantry, Danny and Lila worked side by side, organizing cans and checking expiration dates. Pastor Roberts stopped by, clapping Danny on the shoulder. "Don't know what we'd do without you two," the pastor said warmly. "You're here every week, rain or shine." "Just doing our part," Danny replied quietly, helping an elderly woman with her box of donations. Lila watched her father as he worked, noting how gentle his hands were as he helped others, how his strength seemed to make people feel safe rather than intimidated. She saw how the other volunteers smiled when he walked by, how children gravitated toward his calm presence. As they finished up for the night, Lila helped her father stack the last of the boxes. The basement was quiet now, most volunteers having headed home. "Dad?" she said, pausing in her work. Danny looked up, a question in his eyes. "Thanks for teaching me about this stuff," she gestured around the pantry. "About helping people, being kind. Mom would be proud of us, wouldn't she?" Danny's face softened, and he pulled his daughter into a one-armed hug. "She was always the kind one," he said softly. "I just try to live up to her example." The moment was simple but profound. Father and daughter standing together in the quiet church basement, surrounded by the evidence of their service to others. Danny smiled, his heart full of gratitude for these peaceful days with his daughter, for the quiet life they'd built together in Cedar Ridge. The evening air grew crisp as Danny and Lila made their way home from the church. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, but their warm laughter brightened the dimly lit alley they often used as a shortcut. And then Sarah hit that high note, Lila giggled, swinging their joined hands back and forth. Poor Mrs. Jenkins nearly jumped out of her seat. Danny's deep chuckle echoed off the brick walls. Well, enthusiasm counts for something, right? Dad, you should have seen her face, Lila continued. I had to pretend I was coughing to hide my laugh. Two dark figures stepped out from behind a dumpster, cutting off their path. Danny's hand tightened instinctively around Lila's. The larger of the two men held a knife, its blade catching the weak light. Wallet and the girl's backpack? The knife wielder demanded, his voice muffled by a black ski mask. Now, the second man moved to circle behind them, boxing them in. Danny gently pushed Lila behind him, his movements deliberate and controlled. His voice, when it came, was surprisingly soft. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The muggers exchanged glances, and the one with the knife barked out a harsh laugh. Yeah? And why's that, old man? Danny's shoulders relaxed, but not in fear. It was the looseness of a fighter preparing to move. Because you're making a mistake you'll regret. Walk away now. Shut up and give us your money. The second man lunged forward. What happened next seemed to defy physics. Danny's hand shot out, catching the attacker's wrist. A simple twist, a pivot of his hip, and the man was suddenly airborne. He landed with a thud, wheezing as the air left his lungs. The knife wielder charged, blade flashing. Danny stepped into the attack instead of away from it. His movements were fluid, precise, the product of thousands of hours of training. He redirected the knife hand, used the attacker's momentum against him, and in one smooth motion disarmed him. The knife clattered harmlessly across the pavement. Both men were down in less than 10 seconds. No punches thrown, no excessive force, just clinical efficiency. From the mouth of the alley came the distinct sound of someone whistling low. A young man stood there, phone raised, having captured the entire exchange. Holy shit, the witness breathed. That was incredible. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded the alley as a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Martinez, who often stopped by Danny's garage for oil changes, stepped out with his hand on his holster. Everything all right here? He called out, taking in the scene. The two would-be muggers were already scrambling to their feet, hands raised. The knife lay forgotten near the dumpster. Just a misunderstanding, Danny said quietly. These young men were about to make a poor choice, but I think they've changed their minds. Officer Martinez's eyebrows shot up as he recognized Danny. Mr. Cole, you okay? Lila, we're fine, Danny assured him. He turned to the muggers, who seemed to shrink under his steady gaze. These boys need help more than they need handcuffs, Jim. Maybe we can find them some? The officer looked uncertain. They pulled a knife, Danny. That's armed robbery. I'm not pressing charges, Danny said firmly. Sometimes people just need a second chance to make better choices. After taking statements and collecting the knife as evidence, Officer Martinez agreed to connect the young men with a local youth outreach program instead of booking them. The would-be muggers couldn't seem to look Danny in the eye as they were led away. The witness with the phone introduced himself as Kevin and showed them the video he'd captured. This is going viral for sure. Where'd you learn to move like that? A long time ago, Danny replied, his voice tight. And I'd appreciate it if you'd delete that video. But Kevin was already typing on his phone, excitement written across his face. No way, man. People need to see this. It's like something out of an action movie, except it's real. Danny's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He knew the moment had already slipped beyond his control. The walk home was heavy with silence. The streetlights seemed darker somehow, the shadows deeper. Lila's hand trembled slightly in his, and Danny's heart ached at the fear he felt in her grip. Finally, just a block from home, Lila's whisper broke through the quiet night. Dad, how did you do that? Danny stared straight ahead, his steps never faltering. The words came out soft and heavy with memories he'd tried to bury. Old habits die hard, sweetheart. Danny's phone buzzed again, lighting up the dim morning bedroom. He squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the flood of notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and social media alerts cluttered his display. Before he could process what was happening, loud knocking echoed through the house. "Danny! Danny! Open up!" Jake's familiar voice boomed from the front porch. Throwing on a worn gray t-shirt, Danny padded down the hallway in his sock feet. He opened the door to find Jake practically bouncing with excitement, his round face split by a huge grin. "Buddy, you're famous." Jake thrust his phone into Danny's face. "Look at this. The video's got over 50,000 views already." Danny blinked at the screen, recognizing himself in the grainy footage from the alley. His stomach tightened as he watched his own fluid movements disarm the would-be muggers. "Jake, it's not that big a deal," Danny said, running a hand through his messy brown hair. "Not a big deal?" Jake laughed, following Danny into the kitchen. "The whole town's talking about it. Brave mechanic dad protects daughter from thugs. That's what Channel 5 is calling you." The coffee maker gurgled to life as Danny tried to process this information. "The news picked it up?" "Morning, Uncle Jake." Lila bounded into the kitchen, already dressed for school. She grabbed Jake's phone, grinning as she watched the video again. "Dad, this is so cool. Everyone at school's gonna flip." Danny managed a small smile, watching his daughter's excitement. "Just remember, violence isn't the answer, sweetheart. I only did what I had to do to keep us safe." "Always the humble hero," Jake said, helping himself to coffee. "Better get used to the attention, buddy. You're Cedar Ridge's newest celebrity." At the auto shop that morning, Danny found it hard to focus on work. Customers kept dropping by, not for car repairs, but to shake his hand and praise his bravery. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery brought fresh cinnamon rolls. Old Mr. Peters insisted on taking a selfie with him. "Never knew you had it in you, Cole," said Officer Martinez, stopping by on his morning patrol. "Those moves were something else. Ever consider teaching self-defense classes?" Danny wiped his greasy hands on a shop rag, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just got lucky, that's all." Jake snorted from under a nearby Chevy. "Lucky? Come on, man. Those were trained moves. Where'd you learn to fight like that?" "Here and there," Danny mumbled, diving back under the hood of a Ford pickup. By lunchtime, his phone had nearly exploded with messages. Local reporters wanted interviews. The town's Facebook page was filled with praise and speculation about his mysterious fighting skills. Even Pastor Jim called, his warm voice filled with pride. "Danny, what you did was a blessing," the pastor said. "Would you consider speaking at our next prayer breakfast? The congregation would love to hear your story." Danny hesitated, grease-stained fingers tight on the phone. "I don't know, Pastor. I'm not much for public speaking." "Just think about it. Sometimes God gives us talents for a reason." The afternoon brought more visitors and well-wishers. Danny handled each interaction with quiet grace, deflecting praise and changing the subject whenever possible. But he couldn't deny the warm feeling in his chest when people spoke about his protection of Lila. At the end of his shift, Danny found Jake grinning at him again. "You know what this means, right? No more hiding in the shadows, buddy. Cedar Ridge needs more men like you." Danny just shook his head, but his usual heaviness felt slightly lighter. When he picked up Lila from school, she practically skipped to the truck. "Dad, you should have seen it. Everyone wanted to know about last night. Sarah Jenkins said you moved like a superhero." "I'm no hero, sweetheart," Danny said, but he couldn't help smiling at her enthusiasm. "You are to me," Lila said simply, squeezing his hand. That evening, they sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs. The setting sun painted the room in warm golden light. Danny glanced at his reflection in the window, studying the familiar lines of his face. The quiet strength in his eyes seemed different somehow, less burdened, perhaps. Lila chatted about her day between bites, her face animated. And then Madison showed everyone the video on her phone, and Mr. Thompson said, "You should teach P." Danny chuckled, twirling pasta on his fork. The attention still made him uneasy, but seeing Lila's pride made it easier to bear. For years, he'd worked so hard to be invisible, to be just another face in the crowd. Now, watching his daughter beam across the table, he wondered if maybe it was okay to step into the light, just a little. His reflection stared back at him from the darkening window, a mix of pride and uncertainty in its eyes. The man he saw there wasn't quite the Danny Cole who'd woken up yesterday morning, but maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Cole's Auto Repair as Danny wiped his hands on a red shop rag. His phone buzzed for what felt like the 100th time that week. Another reporter wanted to talk about the hero mechanic. He smiled and shook his head, still amazed by all the attention. "You better answer that one," Jake called from under a pickup truck. "Channel 5 News is outside again." Danny stepped out of the garage, squinting in the bright sunlight. A fresh-faced reporter with perfectly styled hair stood next to a cameraman, both beaming at him. "Mr. Cole, would you mind giving us a few words about that incredible night?" The reporter held out her microphone. "Not much to tell, really." Danny shrugged, his weathered face kind, but modest. "Just did what anyone would do to protect their kid." The interview went quickly, Danny deflecting praise with gentle humor and humility. When asked about his fighting skills, he simply said, "Used to box a little in my younger days." Back inside the shop, Jake whistled. "Man, you're getting more famous by the minute. Lila must be loving this." Danny nodded, thinking of how his daughter's eyes had lit up at school when classmates called her dad a hero. It felt good, seeing her proud of him for a change. Meanwhile, in a cramped office in Nashville, Sarah Myers sat forward in her chair, replaying the viral video for the 10th time. Her sharp eyes studied the mechanic's movements frame by frame. Those weren't just self-defense moves, they were professional techniques. She'd covered enough fights to know, "I've seen those combinations before," she muttered, fingers flying across her keyboard. Her search brought up grainy footage from a decade ago. Danny the Bulldog, Cole versus Marcus Rivera, national championship fight. Sarah's breath caught as she watched the younger Danny, fierce and focused, moving with the same fluid grace she'd seen in the alley video. Then came the fatal blow. Rivera went down hard and never got up. She grabbed her phone, dialing her editor. "Jack, I've got something big. Remember that viral video of the mechanic, Dad?" He's Danny Cole, the MMA fighter who disappeared after killing Rivera in the ring 10 years ago. Back in Cedar Ridge, Danny was just finishing up at the shop when a sleek rental car pulled into the lot. A woman in her late 30s stepped out, her pressed blazer and determined stride marking her as different from the usual small-town crowd. "Mr. Cole?" Sarah approached with a professional smile. "I'm Sarah Myers from the Nashville Tribune. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about the other night?" Danny wiped his hands again, that same humble smile in place. "Ma'am, I've already talked to quite a few reporters." "Actually," Sarah cut in smoothly, pulling out her tablet, "I'd like to ask you about a different night. October 15th, 2013. The Rivera fight." The shop rag slipped from Danny's fingers. All the warmth drained from his face as he stared at the image she held up. Himself, younger and harder, standing over Rivera's motionless body. "That's not." Danny's voice cracked. He glanced around quickly, desperate to make sure no one else was within earshot. "But it is you, isn't it?" Sarah pressed. "Danny the Bulldog Cole, undefeated champion until that night. The night Marcus Rivera died in the ring. You disappeared after that. Changed your name slightly. Moved here. Became a mechanic." Danny's hands trembled. "Please. My daughter doesn't know." But it was too late. Neither of them had noticed Lila approaching from behind the shop, coming to surprise her dad after school. She stood frozen, her backpack sliding off her shoulder to hit the ground with a thud. "Dad?" Her voice was small, confused. Danny spun around, his face ashen. "Lila, baby." But Lila had already pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she typed, "Danny Bulldog Cole Rivera." Her eyes grew wide as articles and videos filled her screen. She backed away, tears welling up. "I have to. I need to." She turned and ran, leaving her backpack in the dust. Sarah watched the girl flee, her reporter's instinct warring with sudden guilt. "Mr. Cole, I think you should go," Danny said quietly, his voice hollow. He picked up Lila's abandoned backpack, holding it like something precious and broken. The drive home was silent, Lila's backpack sitting between them and Danny's truck like a wall. He tried several times to speak, but no words came. When they arrived, Lila ran straight to her room and slammed the door. Danny stood in the hallway, his heart pounding as he heard her crying. Through her door, he could hear the tinny sound of old fight footage playing on her phone. His past, spilling out through her tiny speakers, poisoning everything they'd built here. "Lila?" he called softly, resting his forehead against her door. "Sweetheart, please." The crying paused. Then came her voice, thick with tears. "Dad, did you kill someone?" Danny's hand fell from the doorknob. The weight of 10 years of silence crushed his chest. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words would come. The morning sun couldn't pierce the heavy clouds hanging over Cedar Ridge. Danny sat at his kitchen table, staring at the local newspaper. His coffee grew cold, untouched. The bold headline seemed to scream at him. "Local hero, once killer cage fighter." His hands trembled as he read the article. Sarah Myers had done her homework. Details of his past life as Danny the Bulldog Cole filled the page. His rise through amateur fights, his championship victories, and that final, fatal match. The words blurred before his eyes. From upstairs came the sound of a door slamming. Lila hadn't spoken to him since last night. "Honey," he called out, his voice rough. "Time for school." "I'm not going," Lila's voice cracked. Everyone's probably seen it by now. Danny's chest tightened. He'd spent 10 years building a quiet life here, protecting her from his past. Now it was all crumbling. The phone rang. It was Jake from the shop. "Danny, look, I hate to do this, but 3 customers called to cancel their appointments this morning," they said. Jake's voice trailed off. "I understand," Danny said quietly, hanging up before Jake could finish. He drove to work anyway, taking the long route to avoid the church where he'd volunteered just days ago. The shop felt different now. Tools that usually brought him comfort felt cold and strange in his hands. Even the familiar smell of motor oil and grease couldn't ground him. As he worked alone on an old Chevy, memories flooded back. Memories he'd fought so hard to lock away. The roar of the crowd, the bright lights. His opponent, Marcus Rivera, dancing across the cage. They'd fought twice before, splitting the victories. This was the tiebreaker, the championship bout. Danny remembered the perfectly timed counterpunch. It hadn't seemed different from any other strike he'd thrown in hundreds of fights. Rivera had rolled with it, but somehow his head had hit the cage post at just the wrong angle. The thud, the sudden silence, the medical team rushing in. Danny blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. His wrench had stopped moving, and he realized he'd been standing still for minutes. The shop's bell chimed. Pastor Jim walked in, his usual warm smile replaced by an uncomfortable expression. "Danny," he said, shifting his weight. Well, the church council met this morning. We think it might be best if you took a break from the food pantry, just until things settle down." Danny nodded, unable to meet the pastor's eyes. "I understand," he said for the second time that day. The words tasted bitter. "It's not that we don't appreciate your help," Pastor Jim added hastily. "It's just the parents. Some of them expressed concerns about having their kids around a killer." Danny's voice was barely a whisper. The pastor didn't answer. He left quickly, the bell chiming again like a funeral toll. By afternoon, the cancellations had piled up. Danny worked mechanically on the Chevy, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of repairs. Each turn of the wrench felt like penance. More memories surfaced. The hospital waiting room, the doctor's grave face. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Rivera didn't make it." The screams of Rivera's wife. His children crying. Danny had left everything behind that night. His career, his trophies, his identity. He'd given most of his money to Rivera's family and disappeared. Only his daughter had kept him going, given him purpose. Now she wouldn't even look at him. The sun was setting when he finally closed the shop. The drive home felt longer than usual, each familiar street sign seeming to judge him silently. At home, Lila's door remained closed. A plate of untouched dinner sat outside it. Danny's footsteps echoed in the quiet house as he climbed to his attic. In the far corner, behind old Christmas decorations and boxes of Lila's baby clothes, sat a dusty gym bag. Danny pulled it out slowly, unzipping it for the first time in a decade. The leather gloves still smelled the same. He'd worn them in every professional fight, including the last one. They were top-quality gear, custom-made for him, with Bulldog stitched across the knuckles. Danny ran his fingers over the worn leather. These hands had once earned him glory. Now they reminded him only of loss. He found an empty box and placed the gloves inside carefully. With a thick black marker, He wrote 2 words on the lid. Never again. The box felt heavier than it should as he carried it to the basement. He placed it on the highest shelf, behind paint cans and old textbooks, where it would stay untouched, just like the memories it contained. Back in the kitchen, the newspaper still lay open on the table. Danny finally read the whole article. Sarah Myers had been thorough, interviewing his old trainer, finding court documents, even quoting Rivera's family. She'd painted him as a man who'd fled from responsibility rather than face the consequences of his actions. Maybe she was right. Danny sank into his chair, the weight of the past crushing down on him. The quiet tick of the kitchen clock marked each second of his isolation. Outside, a car drove past, probably one of his former customers heading to another mechanic. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar sounds that now felt like accusations. Upstairs, Lila's silence continued to speak volumes. He'd spent 10 years trying to be a different man, a good father, a helpful neighbor, a man of faith. But the past wasn't finished with him yet. As darkness fell outside, Danny sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the pieces of his shattered peace. Danny slipped into the back pew of Cedar Ridge Community Church, his usual spot now feeling like an island of isolation. The morning sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows that danced across empty seats beside him. A few heads turned, then quickly looked away. The whispers had become a familiar sound over the past week. Across the aisle, 5 rows ahead, Lila sat with the Morgan family, their neighbors who had offered to take her to church. Her shoulders were stiff, her honey-brown hair pulled back severely. She hadn't spoken more than 10 words to him since that night. Pastor Robert stepped up to the pulpit, clearing his throat. "Today's sermon is about judgment," he began, and Danny couldn't help but wonder if the topic had been chosen with him in mind. His calloused hands folded tightly in his lap as the pastor spoke about forgiveness and second chances. The hymns felt hollow without Lila's voice beside him. She used to lean against his shoulder during services, sometimes humming off-key just to make him smile. Now, the space next to him yawned wide and empty. When the service ended, Danny stayed seated while others filed out. He watched Lila hurry through the doors without a backward glance, her blue dress disappearing into the crowd. The ache in his chest had nothing to do with physical pain. "Mr. Cole?" He looked up to find Sarah Myers standing in the aisle. Her professional edge had softened somewhat, and she held a small notebook instead of a camera. Her dark hair was pulled back, making her look younger than she had during their confrontation days ago. "I'm not interested in another interview," Danny said quietly, starting to stand. "Wait." Sarah's voice was gentler than before. "Please, just hear me out." Danny paused, then slowly sat back down. The church had emptied, leaving only the faint echo of conversations from the fellowship hall. "I've been doing some research," Sarah said, sliding into the pew in front of him and turning to face him. "About that night in the ring. About what happened after. You didn't just disappear. You donated your entire fight purse to your opponent's family." Danny's jaw tightened. "That's not something I talk about, but maybe you should." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes earnest. "Mr. Cole, people don't need another story about a perfect hero. They need to hear about redemption. About someone who made mistakes and found a way forward." "Forward?" Danny's laugh was hollow. "My daughter can barely look at me. The garage is empty. Seems like the only direction I'm going is backward." Sarah shook her head. "That's exactly why your story matters. You walked away from violence. You built a new life. You've spent years helping people, raising your daughter with kindness. That's the real story. Not what happened in one terrible moment, but what you chose to do with all the moments after." Danny stood, his voice firm but tired. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Miss Myers, but I'm done with cameras and interviews. Some stories are better left in the past." He walked out of the church into the bright Tennessee sunshine. The parking lot was nearly empty now, his old pickup truck sitting alone in the corner. The drive home was silent. No radio, no Lila's chatter about youth group plans. The house felt too big, too quiet. Danny's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as he headed to the kitchen to start lunch. A piece of paper on the counter caught his eye. Lila's handwriting, neat and precise. "I don't know who you are anymore." 5 words. They hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken in the ring. Danny sank into a kitchen chair, the note trembling in his hands. The carefully constructed piece of the past decade was crumbling, and he didn't know how to hold on to the pieces. That evening, After hours of sitting in silence, Danny did something he hadn't done in years. He knelt beside his bed, clasped his hands, and prayed. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. "Lord," he whispered, "I know I haven't been the best at keeping in touch, but I need help. Not for me, for Lila. Show me how to fix this. How to make her understand that the man I was isn't the father I've tried to be." Tears slipped down his cheeks as he prayed, the weight of guilt and fear and love tangling in his throat. When he finally stood, his knees were stiff, but something had shifted inside. A tiny spark of hope, maybe, or at least determination. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Danny arrived early at the garage, the familiar smell of oil and metal greeting him as he unlocked the front door. As he flipped on the lights, movement caught his eye through the glass. A teenage boy stood nervously by the entrance, hands stuffed in the pockets of a worn jacket. His dark hair was slightly too long, partially hiding eyes that seemed both defiant and uncertain. Danny recognized him from around town, Marcus Hill, whose older brother was in juvenile detention. "Can I help you?" Danny asked, opening the door. Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot. I'm looking for a job," he said, trying to sound confident but not quite making it. "I'm good with cars. I think I am. I've worked on my uncle's truck some." The morning sun streamed through the wide-open garage door, casting long shadows across the concrete floor of Cole's auto repair. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber hung in the air as Marcus stood awkwardly by a weathered Toyota, wrench gripped too tightly in his unsure hands. Danny watched from the corner of his eye as the teenager struggled with a simple oil change. The boy's movements were stiff and uncertain, so different from the fluid confidence of an experienced mechanic. Every few minutes, Marcus would glance over his shoulder, as if expecting criticism or correction. "Loosen it counterclockwise," Danny said quietly, not looking up from the carburetor he was cleaning. His voice was gentle but distant, careful to maintain professional boundaries. Marcus nodded, his face flushing slightly as he adjusted his grip. "Like this? That's better." Danny wiped his hands on a red shop rag. "Take it slow. No need to rush." The morning ticked by in a rhythm of clanking tools and muffled radio music. Danny found himself studying the boy when Marcus wasn't looking. There was something familiar in the way the teenager held himself. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched, like he was always ready for a fight. Danny recognized that stance from his own youth, from countless hours in the ring. Around noon, Mrs. Henderson came to pick up her car. She'd been a regular customer for years, always bringing homemade cookies during the holidays. Today, she barely made eye contact with Danny, hurrying out with a quick thank you that felt more like goodbye. Marcus noticed. "People treat you different now, huh?" Danny's hand stilled on the wrench he was holding. "Yeah," he admitted. "They do. My brother says sometimes people only see what they want to see." Marcus shrugged, trying to sound casual. "He's in juvie now. Got caught up in some stuff he shouldn't have." Danny nodded, letting the silence stretch comfortable between them. He remembered being 17, feeling like the whole world was ready to judge you before knowing your story. "Listen," Danny said finally. "I can't pay much. Part-time work, after school and weekends. But if you're serious about learning—" "I am," Marcus cut in quickly. Yes, sir. I want to learn." The bell over the door chimed, and Danny's heart caught as Lila walked past the garage entrance. She was probably heading to her friend Emma's house, taking the shortcut through the alley behind the shop. Her backpack hung heavy on one shoulder, and her brown hair, so like her mother's, swayed as she walked. She didn't even glance his way. Danny's grip tightened on his wrench until his knuckles went white. The pain in his chest was worse than any hit he'd taken in the ring. He wanted to call out to her, to explain everything, but the words stuck in his throat. Marcus pretended to be very interested in organizing tools, giving Danny a moment to compose himself. The gesture, small but thoughtful, made Danny's decision easier. "Okay then," Danny said, his voice rough. "You start tomorrow. 3 to 7 on weekdays, 9 to 5 on Saturdays. We'll see how it goes." Relief flooded Marcus's face. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. I won't let you down." They worked side by side through the afternoon, Danny demonstrating basic maintenance tasks while Marcus watched intently. The boy was a quick study, eager to learn despite his inexperience. His questions were smart, showing genuine interest rather than just going through the motions. As the day wound down, Marcus helped clean up, sweeping metal shavings and wiping down workbenches. The setting sun painted the garage in warm oranges and deep shadows. Danny noticed Marcus favoring his right arm slightly as he lifted a heavy toolbox. "Here, let me help with that," Danny offered, reaching for the box. As Marcus shifted his grip, his sleeve rode up, revealing a pattern of purple-yellow bruises across his forearm. They weren't the random marks of teenage roughhousing. Danny had seen enough fighting injuries to recognize deliberate strikes. Marcus quickly pulled his sleeve down, but not before Danny had taken in the full extent of the bruising. Their eyes met for a moment. Marcus's defiant and wary, Danny's careful to stay neutral despite the concern building in his chest. Danny didn't ask. He remembered too well how questions could make walls go up faster than concrete. Instead, he simply said, "Good work today. See you tomorrow at 3?" Marcus nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "Yes, sir. Thank you again." Danny watched as the boy walked away, his gait still holding that fighter's readiness. The bruises bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He'd seen too many kids in his fighting days trying to prove themselves through violence, thinking it was the only language the world understood. He locked up the garage, the familiar routine of checking doors and windows, giving his hands something to do while his mind churned. The empty shop felt heavier than usual, filled with the ghosts of better days when Lila would sit at his desk doing homework, when customers smiled instead of hurrying away. The security light flickered on automatically, casting harsh fluorescent light across the parking lot. Danny stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the space where Lila had walked past earlier without a word. The distance between them seemed to grow larger every day, like a chasm he didn't know how to bridge. Tomorrow would be another day of silence at breakfast, another day of trying to catch his daughter's eye, another day of carrying the weight of his past. But now there was Marcus too, a kid who needed something Danny wasn't sure he could give anymore. Trust, guidance, maybe even hope. He closed the garage door with a metallic rattle that echoed in the empty lot. The bruises on Marcus's arm stayed with him, a reminder that some fights couldn't be won with fists, and some kinds of strength had nothing to do with throwing punches. The morning air was crisp and clean as Danny pulled into the garage parking lot. The sun hadn't quite cleared the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. He liked these quiet moments before the day officially began. Just him and the peaceful silence of dawn. But today was different. As he walked around to unlock the back door, he heard rhythmic movement and sharp breaths coming from behind the building. Danny's footsteps slowed, careful and quiet. There was Marcus, shirt already damp with sweat, throwing punches at an invisible opponent. His form was raw and untrained, but there was power in his movements, the kind that came from anger rather than discipline. His face was tight with concentration, jaw clenched as he jabbed and hooked at the empty air. Danny watched for a moment, his heart heavy with recognition. He'd seen that same desperate energy in himself once, long ago. "Your guard's dropping," Danny said softly. Marcus spun around, startled, his face flushed red with embarrassment, and something else, fear, maybe. "Mr. Cole, I was just working out some frustration." Danny set his toolbox down and leaned against the wall. Marcus looked down at his scraped knuckles. "Yeah, something like that." His voice was defensive, challenging Danny to make something of it. Danny nodded slowly. "Your left hook needs work. You're leaving yourself wide open." Marcus's head snapped up, surprise replacing his defensive posture. "You're not mad?" "Mad? No." Danny crossed his arms, studying the boy. "But I am concerned. Fighting's a dangerous path when anger's driving." "I'm not looking to hurt anyone," Marcus said quickly. Sometimes I need to." "To feel strong?" Danny finished for him. "To feel in control?" Marcus's shoulders slumped. "Yeah." Danny was quiet for a long moment, weighing his next words carefully. "I could show you something better. Not fighting. Control. Focus. The kind that actually helps. Like training?" Marcus's eyes lit up with interest. "Like discipline," Danny corrected. "After work hours, simple drills, breathing, movement, the stuff that builds strength here." He tapped his temple. "Not just in your fists." Marcus shifted from foot to foot, uncertain. "Why would you help me? Everyone in town thinks you're dangerous now." Danny smiled sadly. "Maybe that's exactly why I should help. Come on, let's get the shop opened up." We can talk more after closing time." They worked through the morning in comfortable silence, but Danny noticed Marcus seemed more focused than usual, his movements more purposeful. Around noon, while Marcus was under a car changing oil, Danny spotted a familiar face through the garage windows. Sarah Myers stood across the street, notepad in hand, watching. But she wasn't approaching with accusations this time. Her expression was thoughtful, observant. Danny met her gaze steadily, and after a moment, she gave him a small nod before walking away. The workday passed quickly, and as the sun began to set, Danny led Marcus to a clear space behind the garage. "First lesson," he said, "is learning to breathe." Marcus looked skeptical. "Breathe? I already know how to breathe." "You know how to take in air," Danny corrected. "I'm talking about breathing with purpose. Watch." He demonstrated a deep, controlled breath, explaining how it centered the mind and body. For the next hour, they worked on simple exercises, breathing patterns, basic stances, and controlled movements. Nothing flashy or aggressive, just fundamental discipline. Marcus struggled at first, impatient for something more exciting, but Danny kept him focused. "This is boring," Marcus complained after their 20th slow-motion punch drill. "Boring is good," Danny replied. "Boring means you're learning patience. Excitement and anger are easy. Control is hard." As they finished up, Danny saw something different in Marcus's eyes. A glimmer of understanding, maybe even respect. The boy's usual restless energy had settled into something calmer. "Same time tomorrow?" Marcus asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide his eagerness. "If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." Danny grabbed his keys. "Come on, I'll drive you home." The drive was quiet, but comfortable. As they turned onto Marcus's street, Danny's hands tightened on the steering wheel. There, on the front porch of a small, worn house, sat a woman in a ratty lawn chair. Even from the car, Danny could see the telltale sway in her posture, the empty bottles at her feet. Marcus's mother. The boy's face hardened as they pulled up. "Thanks for the ride, Mr. Cole," he said quickly, already reaching for the door handle. "Marcus." Danny's voice stopped him. "You know you can talk to me if you need to, right?" Marcus paused, his hand on the door. "Yeah, thanks." He got out quickly, heading toward the house with his head down. Danny watched him go, his chest tight with an ache he knew too well. He'd seen that same pain in the mirror years ago. The shame, the anger, the desperate need to be stronger than your circumstances. Back then, he'd channeled it all into violence, into the ring, into a path that eventually led to tragedy. But maybe now he could help someone else find a better way. As Marcus disappeared into the house, his mother barely stirring from her stupor, Danny sat there a moment longer. The evening sky had turned deep purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. He thought of Lila, of how she still wouldn't meet his eyes at breakfast. He thought of Sarah, watching from across the street. He thought of Marcus, throwing angry punches at shadows. Sometimes healing started in the strangest ways, not with grand gestures or public statements, but with simple moments like teaching a troubled boy how to breathe. The morning sun streamed through the windows of May's diner, casting warm squares of light across the worn leather booths. Danny spotted Lila immediately. She always chose the same corner spot on Saturday mornings, textbook spread out around her half-eaten plate of pancakes. His heart ached seeing her there alone, knowing she'd been avoiding their usual weekend breakfast tradition since learning about his past. He hesitated by the door, his weathered hands fidgeting with his car keys. The breakfast crowd chatter filled the air with a comfortable din, but to Danny, it felt deafening. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to her table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. Lila glanced up from her math homework, her expression guarded. She gave a small shrug and moved her backpack from the opposite bench. Danny slid into the seat, noting how she shifted slightly away from him. May, the elderly waitress who'd known them for years, approached with her coffee pot. "The usual, Danny?" "Just coffee today, May. Thanks." As May poured his coffee, Danny watched his daughter pretend to focus on her equations. Her pencil moved across the paper, but he could tell she wasn't really solving anything. "Lila," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I owe you an explanation. A real one." She set down her pencil but didn't look up. "Why now? You've had 15 years to tell me." Danny wrapped his hands around the warm coffee mug. "Because I was scared. Scared of seeing that look in your eyes. The one you gave me when you found out. The same look everyone else gives me now. The look people give someone who killed another person. Her words were sharp, but her voice trembled. Yes, Danny admitted, the word heavy between them. But it's not the whole story. He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. His name was Keith Martinez. We'd fought twice before. Good, clean matches. That night was the championship. Danny's eyes grew distant, remembering. 4th round. I landed a combination. Nothing illegal. Nothing. We hadn't both taken 100 times before. But he fell wrong. His head. Danny's voice caught. Lila finally looked up, meeting her father's eyes. They were glossy with unshed tears. I quit that night, Danny continued. Walking away from the sport, the money, all of it. That was the easy part, living with it. He shook his head. I couldn't throw a punch without seeing his face. Couldn't watch boxing matches on TV. Couldn't even break down cardboard boxes for recycling without feeling sick. Is that why we moved here? Lila asked quietly. Danny nodded. Cedar Ridge was as far from that world as I could get. I found the garage, found our church, found peace, or something like it. He reached across the table, not touching her hand, but leaving his own open. But I never found the right way to tell you. How do you tell your little girl something like that? I'm not little anymore, Dad. No, he agreed with a sad smile. You're not, which is why you deserve the truth. I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm trying every day to be someone better, someone worthy of being your father. The diner's bell chimed as the door opened, and Marcus walked in, his work uniform already smudged with grease from the morning shift. He spotted them and headed over, his face brightening. Hey, Mr. Cole. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. It's okay, Marcus, Danny said. Everything all right at the garage? Yeah, just grabbing breakfast before heading back. Marcus shifted his weight, seeming nervous but determined. Actually, I wanted to thank you. For yesterday, you know? That breathing stuff you showed me? It really helped. First time in forever I didn't punch my wall when Mom. He trailed off, glancing at Lila. Well, anyway, it helped. Lila looked between Marcus and her father. Surprise evident on her face, Danny nodded. Glad to hear it. Remember what I said. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can take without hitting back, Marcus finished. Yeah, I'm working on it. He gave a quick wave. See you Monday, Mr. Cole. Bye, Lila. As Marcus walked away, Lila watched her father. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, the tired lines around his eyes. For the first time, she saw both versions of him, the fighter he'd been and the father he'd become. You're teaching him not to fight? She asked. I'm teaching him what I learned the hard way, Danny replied. That violence doesn't heal anything. It just passes the pain around. Lila was quiet for a long moment, pushing her cold pancakes around her plate. I wish you'd told me sooner, she finally said. But I think I understand why you didn't. Danny felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the angry silence of the past few days. Lila still looked out the window, watching the familiar streets of Cedar Ridge roll by. But her shoulders weren't as tense. When Danny's old pickup hit the pothole it always did on Oak Street, he caught the ghost of a smile on her face. The same spot had been making her bounce in her seat since she was little. The morning sun streamed through the garage windows as Danny wiped grease from his hands. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled the air. He'd just finished fixing Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick when he heard footsteps approaching. Sarah Myers stood in the doorway, her journalist's notebook tucked under her arm. Danny tensed, but her smile seemed different today, warmer, less predatory. Before you say no, she began, holding up her hands, hear me out. I talked to Pastor Jim. Danny raised an eyebrow, continuing to clean his tools. That so? The church pantry needs funds, Sarah explained, stepping into the garage. And after everything that happened, the community could use some healing. Pastor Jim and I thought, what if you taught a self-defense class for charity? Danny stopped wiping his wrench, considering her words. The idea struck a chord, using his skills to help rather than hurt. Still, doubt crept in. I don't know. Dad, you should do it. Lila's voice rang out. She emerged from behind a car where she'd been doing homework. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, the first time they'd held that light in weeks. Marcus, who was organizing tools nearby, chimed in. "Yeah, Mr. Cole, show people what you taught me. About control and stuff." Danny looked at their eager faces, feeling something shift inside him. Maybe this was a chance to transform his past into something positive. The church approved this? Sarah nodded. Pastor Jim himself, he says it's a way to bring people together. After a long moment, Danny set down his tools. All right. But no fighting, just basics. Safety first. The next few days transformed the church hall into a makeshift training space. They laid out exercise mats and hung inspirational banners. Word spread quickly through Cedar Ridge, and soon Danny found himself facing a diverse group of students. Mrs. Peterson, the 70-year-old librarian, stood next to teenage Katie from the coffee shop. Bob from the hardware store joined, as did several mothers and their children. Even some of Danny's regular customers showed up, curious to see their mechanic in a new light. "Remember," Danny told them, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about fighting. It's about awareness, confidence, and respect for ourselves and others." He demonstrated simple moves, how to stand properly, how to be aware of your surroundings, how to break free from a grip. Sarah's camera captured moments of learning and laughter, but Danny barely noticed it anymore. "Like this, Mr. Cole?" asked Mrs. Peterson, practicing a defensive stance. Danny smiled, adjusting her elbow slightly. "Perfect, Mrs. Peterson, you're a natural." Music played softly in the background. Lila's playlist of upbeat songs. The atmosphere was light, filled with encouragement and occasional bursts of laughter when someone stumbled or made a joke. Marcus helped demonstrate techniques, standing straighter than Danny had ever seen him. The boy's usual scowl had been replaced by a focused expression as he helped others learn. "See how Marcus keeps his balance?" Danny explained to the group. "That's not just for self-defense. It's about finding your center in life, too." During water breaks, people chatted and shared stories. The walls that had gone up after Sarah's initial article seemed to be coming down. Danny caught glimpses of her filming, but her presence felt different now, supportive rather than invasive. As the afternoon progressed, Danny noticed something remarkable. People weren't just learning self-defense, they were connecting. Mrs. Peterson offered to teach Katie knitting. Bob promised to help Marcus with his college applications. The community was healing, one practice session at a time. "This is what church is supposed to be about," Pastor Jim commented, watching from the doorway. "Coming together, supporting each other." The final session of the day wound down as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the church windows. People gathered their things, chatting and making plans to return for the next class. Pastor Jim approached Danny, extending his hand. "I was wrong about you, Danny. I judged too quickly, forgot what redemption really means." Danny gripped his hand, feeling the weight of those words. Before he could respond, Lila appeared beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. The evening air held a gentle chill as Danny, Lila, and Marcus finished cleaning up the garage. Tools clinked against metal drawers, and the familiar scent of motor oil hung in the air. Danny watched with quiet pride as Marcus carefully arranged the wrenches in perfect order, something the boy had learned from him over the past weeks. "You sure showed those ladies some moves today, Dad," Lila said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. She mimicked an elderly woman's voice. "Oh, Mr. Cole, should I karate chop the bad guy like this?" Marcus snickered, demonstrating an exaggerated defensive stance. Mrs. Peterson was the best, though. She kept asking if she could use her purse as a weapon. Danny smiled, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Hey now, those ladies learn more than you think. Sometimes the best self-defense is just being aware of your surroundings and—" The sharp sound of boots on gravel cut through their laughter. Danny turned toward the garage entrance, his body tensing instinctively. 5 figures emerged from the darkness, their faces hard and angry in the fluorescent shop lights. Danny recognized the leader immediately, Rico Alvarez, his features twisted with rage. The same young man from the alley, but without a mask this time. Danny's heart sank as he noticed Marcus stiffen beside him. "Well, well, the famous fighter," Rico sneered, taking another step forward. His gang spread out behind him, creating a half circle that blocked the exit. "You made us look real bad with that video, old man. Real bad." Danny moved slowly, positioning himself between the gang and the kids. Nobody's looking bad here, Rico. That night's over. Let's keep it that way. Rico's laugh was bitter. Over? Man, it's all over the internet. My little brother's stuck in juvie, and everyone's laughing at us because of you. He pointed at Marcus. And you working for him? After what he did to your brother? Marcus stepped forward. Rico, it's not like that. Mr. Cole's been helping me. Shut up. Rico's voice echoed off the garage walls. You're a traitor, just like your brother was before he got caught. Danny kept his voice steady, his hands open and visible. Listen, son, I know you're angry, but this isn't the way. We can talk about this. Talk? Rico pulled something from his jacket, the metallic glint of brass knuckles catching the light. Nah, we're past talking. Lila gasped behind Danny. He could feel her trembling presence, and it took every ounce of his willpower not to react with force. Rico, these kids have nothing to do with this. Let them leave, and you and I can sort this out. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Rico's face, but then one of his gang members shouted, Show him what happens when he embarrasses us. Everything happened in a blur. Rico lunged forward, but Danny sidestepped smoothly, deflecting the punch without striking back. The other gang members surged forward. Danny called out, Lila, call 911! Marcus, get back! But Marcus didn't retreat. Instead, he tried to help, jumping between Danny and one of the attackers. In the chaos, Rico swung wildly with the brass knuckles. Danny moved to block it, but Marcus was there first. The sickening sound of metal hitting flesh filled the garage. Marcus crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain, clutching his side. Marcus! Lila screamed, her phone already at her ear. Even Rico looked shocked, stepping back as Marcus groaned on the concrete floor. Danny knelt beside the boy, checking his breathing while keeping one eye on the gang. Blood seeped through Marcus's shirt where the brass knuckles had caught him. Distant sirens wailed, growing closer. Rico's gang scattered into the night, but Rico himself stood frozen, staring at Marcus. I didn't mean to, he stammered. Go, Danny said firmly, his voice thick with controlled anger. But this ends here, Rico. No more. Rico backed away, then turned and ran just as red and blue lights began flashing at the end of the street. Danny cradled Marcus's head, speaking softly. Stay with me, son. Help's coming. The boy's eyes were wide with pain and fear, his breathing shallow. Lila dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaming down her face. She gripped her father's arm as police cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt outside the garage. Daddy, is he going to be okay? Danny pulled her close with one arm, still supporting Marcus with the other. He's going to be fine, baby. He's going to be fine. But his voice cracked slightly, betraying his own fear. Paramedics rushed in with their equipment, their urgent voices and movements filling the garage. They worked quickly, checking Marcus's vitals and carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. The police began taking statements, their radios crackling with reports of the fleeing gang members. Through it all, Danny held Lila as she sobbed against his shoulder. They watched as the paramedics loaded Marcus into the ambulance, its lights painting the night in harsh flashes of blue. Danny's shirt was stained with blood, Marcus's blood, and his hands shook slightly as he stroked his daughter's hair. One of the paramedics approached them. We're taking him to Cedar Ridge General. He's stable, but he'll need immediate attention. Would you like to follow us? Danny nodded, already guiding Lila toward his truck. She wouldn't let go of his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. The same arm that had once caused so much damage in the ring now served only to comfort his terrified daughter. As they climbed into the truck, the ambulance pulled away, its sirens piercing the quiet night. Police officers continued to mill around the garage, marking evidence and taking photographs. The peaceful evening that had started with laughter and pride had shattered into chaos and fear. Danny started the engine, his movements mechanical. In the passenger seat, Lila wiped her eyes with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper. This isn't your fault, Dad. But Danny couldn't respond. The weight of the past hours pressed down on him like a physical thing, and all he could do was follow the ambulance's flashing lights into the darkness, praying that history wasn't repeating itself in the worst possible way. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile hospital waiting room, casting harsh shadows across Danny's weathered face. His large, calloused hands were clasped together, knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Lila sat curled in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Cole?" A nurse approached them, clipboard in hand. "Marcus is stable, but he's still in critical condition. The doctors are monitoring him closely." Danny's throat felt tight. "Can we see him?" "Family only right now," the nurse said gently, then paused. "Though Marcus keeps asking for you." Lila touched her father's arm. "Go, Dad. I'll wait here." Danny followed the nurse down the fluorescent-lit hallway, his footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Through the window of the ICU room, he could see Marcus lying still, tubes and wires surrounding him like a web. The boy looked so young, so vulnerable. His phone buzzed. Another news alert. Danny glanced at the headline. "Former cage fighter's past catches up. Violence erupts at local garage." His stomach churned as he read the slanted coverage, painting him as a magnet for trouble, suggesting his violent past had followed him to Cedar Ridge. "This is my fault," Danny whispered, leaning against the wall. "I should have known better than to think I could leave it all behind." A doctor emerged from Marcus's room. "He's asking for you, Mr. Cole." Inside, the steady beep of monitors filled the air. Marcus's face was bruised, his arm in a cast. Danny's chest tightened at the sight. "Hey, kid," he said softly, taking a seat beside the bed. Marcus's eyes fluttered open. "Not your fault," he mumbled through cracked lips. "Rico, he was coming for me anyway. My brother." "Save your strength," Danny said, but Marcus continued. "You tried to stop it, without fighting. Never saw that before." Danny's phone buzzed again. More news alerts, more accusations. His fists clenched involuntarily. Old muscle memory awakening. He could picture Rico's face, could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline. One night, that's all it would take to find them, to make them pay. "Dad?" Lila's voice came from the doorway. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes pleading. "Promise me you won't go after them, please." The desperate tone in her voice cut through his anger like a knife. Danny looked at his clenched fists, remembering another night, another fight, another young man in a hospital bed who never went home. "I can't lose you again," Lila whispered. Danny uncurled his fingers slowly, deliberately. The urge to fight still burned in his veins, but something stronger was taking its place. He looked at Marcus, at Lila, and felt the weight of their trust, their fear, their hope. Slowly, Danny lowered himself to his knees beside Marcus's bed. The cold floor pressed against his legs as he bowed his head. For the first time in years, prayer came naturally, without shame or hesitation. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I give you my anger. I give you my fists. I've been fighting the wrong battles for too long." Lila moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Through the window, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in gentle pinks and golds, softening the harsh hospital lighting. Danny reached out and carefully took Marcus's uninjured hand. "I won't fight anymore, son," he said quietly, meaning every word. "I'll change the fight." Marcus squeezed his hand weakly, understanding in his eyes. Outside, the sun continued to rise, bringing with it the promise of a new day and a different kind of strength. The monitors beeped steadily, marking each precious moment of life. Danny remained kneeling, his daughter's hand warm on his shoulder, as morning light filled the room with hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across Danny's front porch as he settled into his old wooden rocking chair. Sarah Myers sat across from him, her recorder placed carefully on the small table between them. She looked different today, softer somehow, without her usual reporter's sharp edge. "Are you sure about this, Danny?" she asked, her finger hovering over the record button. Danny took a deep breath, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "Those kids at the garage, Marcus in the hospital. I've been running from my past for so long. Maybe it's time to face it." Sarah nodded and pressed record. "Tell me about the fighter you used to be." Danny's eyes grew distant, looking past the quiet street to somewhere far away. "I was barely 20 when I started cage fighting. They called me the Bulldog because once I got hold of something, I never let go." A faint smile crossed his face. "Back then, I thought that was something to be proud of." "You were good at it," Sarah prompted gently. "Too good." Danny's voice cracked slightly. "Won my first 12 fights by knockout. Got a reputation. The crowds loved it. This small-town kid with heavy hands and a mean streak." He paused, rubbing his calloused palms together. "But that's not what fighting was supposed to be about." Not really. Sarah leaned forward. What changed? The championship match. July 15th, 10 years ago. Danny's words came slower now, each one weighted with memory. Mike Thompson was the opponent. Good fighter, better man. Had 2 kids at home. He stopped, swallowing hard. It was just supposed to be another fight. The morning birds fell silent as Danny described the match. The roaring crowd, the flash of cameras, the perfectly timed cross that caught Mike's temple. He went down wrong, hit his head on the way down. I knew the moment it happened that something was different. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as Danny described the chaos that followed. The medics rushing in, the horrible silence in the arena, the long night at the hospital. They said it was nobody's fault. Athletic Commission cleared me. But Mike, he never woke up. What did you do after? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Ran. Danny's shoulders slumped. Couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Couldn't face Mike's family. Just got in my truck and drove until the gas ran out. Ended up here in Cedar Ridge. He gestured to the modest house behind them. Found work at the garage. Tried to forget. But you didn't forget, Sarah observed quietly. Danny shook his head. How could I? Every time I looked at my hands, I saw what they'd done. Started volunteering at the church food pantry. Trying to, balance the scales somehow. He smiled sadly. Pastor Jim, before all this came out, he used to say God gives us tools for a reason. Took me years to understand these hands could build things up instead of tearing them down. And Lila? Sarah asked. How does she fit into all this? Danny's face softened. Lila, she saved me. After her mother passed, raising her became my whole world. She taught me what real strength looks like, getting up every morning, choosing love over anger, finding joy in simple things. He wiped his eyes quickly. Everything I do now, every car I fix, every person I help, it's to show her that people can change, that redemption is possible. Sarah turned off the recorder for a moment. Danny, what made you finally agree to tell this story? He looked toward the garage where Marcus lay recovering in the hospital. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. Those kids out there, Marcus, even those boys who tried to rob us, they need to know violence isn't strength. Real strength? He touched his chest. It's right here, in knowing when not to fight. Sarah clicked the recorder back on. What would you say to Mike Thompson's family if they're watching this? Danny's voice trembled. I'm sorry. Not a day goes by that I don't pray for them. What happened? It lives in my heart every day. I can't change the past, but I can try to honor Mike's memory by helping others choose a different path. The interview continued through the morning as Danny shared stories of his transformation. How faith slowly rebuilt him. How teaching Marcus control instead of combat felt like coming full circle. How every small act of kindness helped heal old wounds. Later that evening, the interview aired nationally. Danny sat on his couch, too nervous to watch himself. But Lila sat transfixed, tears rolling down her cheeks as she watched her father bare his soul to the world. She saw him in a new light, not just as her quiet, strong dad, but as a man who had walked through darkness and chosen light. When the segment ended, Lila slipped away quietly. She went to his workshop, where the box labeled Never Again sat on a high shelf. Standing on tiptoe, she retrieved it and carefully removed the old fighting gloves. They were worn but well kept, telling their own story of victory and loss. With gentle hands, she placed them on his workbench, unfolded and facing up, not hidden away in shame, but resting in the open air like a chapter in a book that needed to be read to be understood. The gloves lay there in the workshop's dim light, no longer symbols of violence, but testaments to a father's journey from darkness to light, from fighter to healer, from running to standing still. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Cedar Ridge Community Church, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden pews. Danny Cole stood at the entrance, his weathered hands fidgeting with his tie. The familiar sounds of the church organ filled the air, but today felt different. The usual warmth of Sunday service was tinged with an electric uncertainty. Lila squeezed his arm gently. It's okay, Dad, she whispered, straightening her flowered dress. We can do this together. As they walked down the center aisle, the whispers started. Danny caught fragments of conversations that fell silent as he passed. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few still held traces of judgment. He guided Lila to their usual spot, third row from the back, trying to make himself smaller despite his broad frame. The church was unusually full today. Danny recognized faces he hadn't seen in months, perhaps drawn by the controversy or maybe seeking their own answers about redemption. Mrs. Henderson, who usually sat 2 pews ahead, actually smiled at him today, a small gesture that somehow made his chest feel lighter. Pastor Jim Whitaker stood at the pulpit, his silver hair catching the morning light. He was partway through his sermon about forgiveness when he suddenly paused, his eyes finding Danny in the congregation. The silence that followed made Danny's heart skip a beat. Brothers and sisters, Pastor Jim's voice rang clear through the church. I'd like to take a moment to address something important. He stepped away from the pulpit, moving to stand at the edge of the platform. We have among us today a man who has taught all of us, a powerful lesson about grace. Danny felt his throat tighten as all eyes turned to him. Lila's hand found his, squeezing tight. Danny Cole, Pastor Jim continued, his voice growing warmer. You came to our community seeking peace, and we welcomed you. When that peace was threatened, you protected not just your daughter, but our sense of safety. And when your past came to light, many of us, myself included, forgot the very teachings we profess to follow. The pastor's words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Several heads nodded in agreement, and Danny could see tears in the eyes of some congregation members. You see, friends, Danny's story isn't just about a fighter who found faith. It's about a man who teaches us daily what it means to choose love over violence, mercy over vengeance. Through his work with young Marcus, through his patience with our judgment, through his dedication to this community, Danny has shown us what living grace truly means. To Danny's surprise, Mrs. Thompson, who had pulled her grandchildren away from him just days ago, stood up. Others followed, and suddenly the entire congregation was on their feet. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous show of support that echoed off the church's high ceiling. Danny felt tears welling in his eyes as familiar faces approached him. Tom from the hardware store clasped his shoulder, apologizing for his cold shoulder earlier that week. Sarah Jenkins, who had canceled her car's maintenance appointment, hugged him and asked if she could reschedule. Each interaction carried the weight of genuine remorse and acceptance. I'm sorry we doubted you, Danny, Mr. Peterson said, his voice cracking. We should have remembered that all of us have pasts we're not proud of. It's what we do with today that matters. Lila stood beside her father, her face glowing with pride. She watched as person after person approached, each offering their own words of support and apology. The very community that had nearly shunned them was now embracing them more fully than ever before. As the crowd began to thin, Danny noticed a figure hovering uncertainly at the edge of the group. Marcus's mother, Linda Hill, stood there, looking smaller than usual in her faded Sunday best. Her hands trembled as she took small steps toward them, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. When she reached Danny, she could barely meet his gaze. Mr. Cole, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to thank you. She twisted her worn purse strap between her fingers. What you did for Marcus. It wasn't just about that night at the garage. Danny waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts, seeing in her face the same struggle he'd faced, the weight of past mistakes, the desperate wish to do better. My boy, she continued, her voice stronger now. He was heading down such a dark path. After his brother went to juvenile detention, I thought I'd lose him too. She looked up at Danny, tears spilling onto her cheeks. But you gave him hope. You showed him another way. Her hands trembled as she reached out to grasp Danny's calloused fingers. You gave him hope, she repeated softly, the words carrying all the weight of a mother's gratitude. The moment hung between them, a quiet testament to the power of second chances. In Linda's tears, Danny saw his own journey reflected. The long road from darkness to light, from violence to peace, from isolation to community. He remembered his own desperate search for redemption and how it had led him here. The autumn breeze carried the familiar scent of motor oil and fresh paint through the open garage doors. Marcus sat on a wooden stool, his arm still wrapped in white bandages, pointing at something under the hood of Mrs. Henderson's old Buick, while Lila handed him tools from a red metal toolbox. No, not that one, Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. The smaller wrench. Lila rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. They all looked the same to me. Danny watched them from his workbench, his weathered hands busy with paperwork he'd normally avoid. But these weren't ordinary forms. They were applications for converting part of Cole's auto repair into something more meaningful. Sarah sat across from him, her laptop open and reading glasses perched on her nose. The town council seems excited about the idea, she said, scrolling through an email. Especially after that piece aired. They're calling it Innovative Community Outreach. Danny rubbed his neck, still uncomfortable with attention, but learning to accept it when it served a greater purpose. Just want to give these kids somewhere safe to go, somewhere they can learn the right way to handle life's punches. The garage looked different now. One wall had been cleared of old tools and spare parts, replaced with exercise mats, and a few punching bags donated by the high school's retired gym teacher. Motivational posters, mostly Bible verses about strength and wisdom, hung between the automotive signs. Second round, Sarah read from the draft proposal. Perfect name. It's about second chances, isn't it? Second chances, second thoughts, before throwing the first punch. Danny nodded, watching Marcus explain something to Lila with surprising patience. Second, look at who you can become. The door chimed as Pastor Mike walked in, carrying a box of donated equipment. The ladies' auxiliary cleaned out their kids' old sports gear, he announced, setting it down. And Mrs. Thompson is organizing a bake sale to help with the renovation costs. Danny stood to help with the box, but the pastor waved him off. You've got enough on your plate, Danny. Let us handle some of the heavy lifting for once. More townspeople trickled in throughout the afternoon. Mr. Jenkins from the hardware store brought paint and brushes. The local carpenter offered to build storage cubbies for the kids' belongings. Even Rico's mother stopped by with homemade empanadas, her eyes wet with gratitude when she saw Marcus teaching Lila how to wrap her hands properly. No fighting, Danny reminded them, though his voice carried no sternness. We're learning control here. Yes, sir, they answered in unison, and Danny felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sundae. Sarah typed furiously on her laptop, pausing occasionally to ask questions. How many kids do you think you can help at once? Danny considered this, looking around the space. Start small, maybe 10 or 12. Quality over quantity. Each kid needs real attention, real guidance. And the program structure, basic physical training, sure. But that's just the tool, Danny explained, his voice soft but certain. Real focus is on discipline, respect, anger, management. Bible study for those who want it. Homework help too. Marcus here is pretty good at math when he applies himself. Marcus ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. Lila bumped his good shoulder playfully. The afternoon wore on as people came and went, each bringing something to contribute. Old gym equipment, sports drinks, even a mini-fridge. The garage slowly transformed, becoming something new while keeping its heart, a place of repair. But now for more than just cars. Danny found himself sharing stories he'd kept buried for years, not of his fights, but of his training, the discipline it taught him, the focus it required. Fighting was never the point, he told a group of volunteers as they cleared space. It's about mastering yourself. Lila watched her father with clear eyes, pride replacing the doubt that had clouded them weeks before. She understood now. The man who had been a fighter and the father who taught her kindness were the same person, each part making him whole. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the garage doors, the space had taken on a new energy. The walls seemed to stand straighter, the air felt clearer, and hope hung tangible in the evening light. The last of the volunteers headed home, leaving behind a transformed space. Tools and car parts now shared territory with training equipment and learning materials. A corner had been set aside for study space, complete with donated desks and a whiteboard. Marcus and Lila stood surveying their work, tired but satisfied. They'd spent hours cleaning, organizing, and planning. Their enthusiasm was contagious, already talking about which of their friends might benefit from the program. Danny walked over to them, his own fatigue mixed with a deep sense of purpose, looking around at the changed garage, not just a repair shop anymore, but a place of transformation. He felt at peace with his past and present, finally aligned. He watched the kids continue cleaning up the day's work, their movements easy and natural. like they belonged there. A small smile crossed his face as he said, "Looks like we're just getting started." The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of cherry blossoms across Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Danny Cole stood before a simple granite headstone, his calloused hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn denim jacket. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, dappling the well-tended grass around his feet. "Hey, Marie," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's been a while." He shifted his weight, taking a deep breath. The air felt lighter somehow, different from his previous visits when grief had sat heavy on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "You wouldn't believe how much Lila's grown," Danny continued, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "She's got your spirit, your kindness. Remember how you always said she'd change the world? Well, she's already changing mine." A robin landed nearby, hopping between the headstones. Danny watched it for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I've been carrying something for a long time, Marie. This weight, this guilt, not just about losing you, but about everything. The fighting, the accident in the ring, running away from who I was." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought I could bury it all, start fresh. But that's not how healing works, is it?" He knelt down, brushing some fallen leaves from the base of the headstone. The marble was cool against his fingertips. "There's this kid, Marcus. He reminds me so much of myself at that age, angry, lost, looking for direction, but helping him. It's like God gave me a second chance, to use what I know for good this time." Danny paused, looking up at the scattered clouds drifting overhead. "The garage is different now. We're turning it into something special, a place called Second Round. Not just fixing cars anymore, but maybe fixing some broken spirits too. You would have loved it." He traced the engraved letters of her name with his finger. "I think I finally understand what you always told me, about strength coming from love, not anger. Took me long enough, huh?" The sound of quiet footsteps in the grass made him turn slightly. Lila stood a few feet away, her dark hair catching the sunlight. She'd grown so tall, so graceful, the spitting image of her mother. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, moving to stand beside him. Danny reached out, and Lila slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both looking at Marie's headstone. "I've been talking to your mom," Danny explained, his voice tender. "Telling her about everything that's happened." Lila nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I miss her." "Me too, sweetheart. Every day." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "But you know what? I think she'd be proud of us, of how far we've come." Danny took a deep breath, feeling decades of guilt and pain finally starting to lift. "I spent so long running from who I was, afraid of what people would think, afraid of what you would think. But now you're helping people," Lila finished for him. "Like Marcus, like all the kids who come to Second Round." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small bouquet of white daisies, Marie's favorites. Together, they placed them carefully at the base of the headstone. "I promise, Marie," Danny said quietly. "No more hiding, no more letting fear win. We're going to live the way you taught us, with open hearts and love." Lila wrapped her arms around her father's waist, hugging him tight. "I love you, Dad." "Love you too, kiddo." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Ready to head back?" She nodded, and they turned away from the grave. As they walked down the gentle slope of the cemetery hill, the late afternoon sun painted the town below in warm, golden light. Their shadows stretched long behind them, father and daughter moving forward together, each step lighter than the last. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring and new beginnings. Danny felt Marie's presence in that breeze, in the warmth of the sun, in the gentle pressure of Lila's hand in his. For the first time in years, his heart felt truly at peace. The warm June evening filled the transformed community center with excited chatter. Where cars and tools once cluttered Danny's former garage, folding chairs now faced a makeshift stage draped with burgundy fabric. Twinkling lights crisscrossed overhead, casting golden light on the diverse crowd below. Barbecue scent from outside mingled with fresh paint from recent renovations. A large banner declared, "Fight Night for Faith, fighting for our youth's future." Smaller signs displayed photos of success stories, teenagers who'd found direction, adults who'd discovered purpose, rebuilt families. Lila Cole, in a simple blue dress and her mother's pearl earrings, moved confidently through the crowd with her clipboard. Her shoulders straight, chin lifted with quiet determination, she directed volunteers with practiced ease far beyond her 15 years. She'd grown tremendously these past months, no longer the uncertain teenager who'd trembled at her father's past revelation. The girl who once doubted everything about her dad had become a young woman understanding strength's many forms. "Programs on the left table," she called clearly. "Donation forms by the entrance, and sign our guest book." She helped an elderly woman find her seat, then adjusted a crooked banner efficiently. Danny watched from his corner near the converted tool cabinet, heart swelling with intense pride. His daughter had organized everything single-handedly, from hand-cut decorations to the speaker's schedule showcasing second round's impact. She'd designed the programs herself, complete with professional photos of youth who'd found hope within these walls. Sarah Myers stood nearby with her camera equipment, checking angles precisely. She caught Danny's eye and smiled warmly, her sharp expression now replaced with genuine affection. "Your daughter's quite something," she said, no longer the relentless journalist seeking to expose his secrets but a friend who'd learned some stories heal rather than harm. "She's got your determination, but something else too." "Better than that," Danny replied softly, watching Lila handle a sound system crisis. "She's got her mother's heart. Rebecca would have been so proud." The chairs filled quickly with familiar and surprising faces. Shop owners who'd once whispered behind Danny's back now sat prominently, checkbooks open. Mrs. Henderson, who'd once refused to meet his eyes, waved enthusiastically. The barber who'd given him cold shoulders chatted about the youth program. Pastor Jim Whitaker, who'd once suggested Danny step away from church activities, now moved through the crowd, offering warm greetings. Parents whose children had found purpose at second round dabbed tears watching their transformed teenagers help with setup. Marcus Hill stood nervously backstage, fidgeting with the navy tie Danny had helped him choose. Despite healing bruises still visible along his jawline, purple fading to yellow, reminders of the night that nearly took everything, his dark eyes shone with purpose and confidence absent 6 months ago. His usually unruly hair was combed, wearing the crisp white shirt with careful pride. Danny approached quietly. "You ready, kid?" Marcus nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again with jerky uncertainty. "What if I mess up? What if I forget? What if they don't believe me?" Danny placed a gentle hand on the teenager's shoulder. "Just speak from here," he said, tapping Marcus's chest. "Don't worry about written words. That's where real strength is. Not in your fists, not in perfection, but in honesty about where you've been and where you're going." The lights dimmed and conversations quieted as Lila stepped onto the stage. She moved with Rebecca's grace, chin lifted. The microphone squeaked as she adjusted it, but her voice rang clear. "Welcome to Fight Night for Faith," she began. "Months ago, this was just my dad's garage, full of broken cars and old memories. Now, it's where lives change daily." She paused, finding her father's gaze. "My dad taught me the bravest thing isn't throwing a punch, it's choosing not to. It's choosing to build instead of tear down." The crowd murmured agreement. Sarah's camera whirred, capturing expressions as the community that had turned its back on Danny now hung on his daughter's words. "Tonight, we're not fighting with fists," Lila continued, gaining strength. "We're fighting for second chances everyone deserves, for hope that refuses to die, for family bound not by blood but by choice." She gestured to pledge cards on every chair. "Every dollar pledged expands second round, so more kids like Marcus and me can discover what we found here. That family isn't just who you're born to. Sometimes it's people who choose to believe in you when you can't believe in yourself." Danny swallowed hard, watching his daughter shine with light illuminating the entire room. She'd written every word herself, refusing his help. "This is my story too, Dad," she'd insisted. "I need to tell it my way." Marcus took the stage next, hands trembling as he unfolded his notebook paper. But seeing encouraging faces, Danny's proud smile, his mother's tear-filled eyes, Lila's supportive nod, his voice found strength. "6 months ago, I was angry at everything," he began honestly. "Loss doesn't cover it. My brother was in juvenile detention again, my mom was battling her own demons, and I thought the world was against me. I was ready to follow my brother's path into trouble." In the third row, Marcus's mother sat straight-spined, 3 months sober, attending her first public event in years. She wore a borrowed dress, tears of pride and regret streaming as her son found his voice. "But then I met Mr. Cole," Marcus continued confidently. "He could have just fixed cars and ignored the angry kid hanging around. Most people did. Instead, he taught me real strength isn't how hard you hit. It's getting back up when life knocks you down. It's choosing to help instead of hurt. It's turning pain into purpose." The teenager's voice cracked as he looked at Danny. "Second round isn't just where kids learn boxing or fix engines. It's proof everyone deserves another chance. Mr. Cole took his past, something that could have destroyed him, and turned it into something beautiful." His voice strengthened. "He saved my life. Not with fists, but patience. Not with violence, but love." The crowd erupted in sustained applause. Sarah's camera panned across faces united in shared purpose. Pledge cards filled quickly, passed forward with enthusiasm. Each form represented not just financial support, but confidence in transformation's power. When someone started chanting, "Danny! Danny!" it spread like wildfire. But this wasn't the bloodthirsty roar of his fighting days. This sound was warm, respectful, filled with genuine love for the man he'd chosen to become. Lila beckoned him to the stage, eyes bright with joyful tears. Danny walked slowly to the microphone, work-worn hands finding the wooden podium Marcus had built. He looked at the sea of faces, his daughter standing proud beside him. Marcus, living proof change was possible. Sarah, who'd helped tell his story with dignity. Pastor Jim, whose apology had begun the community's journey back, and others who'd chosen to believe in second chances. The room fell silent as Danny cleared his throat, voice trembling with emotion as he prepared to close not just the evening, but an entire chapter. "I spent 10 years learning to fight," he began deliberately. "I thought strength meant never backing down, never showing weakness. Tonight, looking at you all, I finally understand real victory." He paused, gazing across the space where broken things came to be made whole. "The hardest fight isn't against an opponent in a ring. It's the battle inside your heart, where you decide who you want to be. Tonight, surrounded by this family we built together, I can honestly say we all won." The evening sun painted Cedar Ridge in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across Danny's auto shop like fingers reaching toward the coming night. The day's work was done, and the familiar scents of motor oil and fresh-cut grass mingled in the cooling air, creating that unique end-of-day perfume that had become as comforting as a prayer. Danny wiped his calloused hands on a red shop rag, the fabric soft from countless washings, taking one final look around the garage. Before pulling down the heavy metal door, tools hung in their proper places on pegboard walls, each wrench and screwdriver exactly where it belonged. A half-finished transmission sat on the workbench, waiting for tomorrow's attention. The concrete floor bore the stains of decades of honest work, oil spots and grease marks that told stories of broken-down cars brought back to life, of neighbors helped and trust rebuilt one repair at a time. The rhythmic song of cicadas filled the air, a peaceful Tennessee lullaby that reminded him of simpler times when Rebecca would sit on these same steps, watching him work late into the evening. As he secured the padlock, checking it twice out of habit, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel caught his attention. He turned to see Lila approaching, her dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight like spun bronze, carrying 2 tall glasses of lemonade that clinked with ice cubes. Drops of condensation had already begun forming on the glasses, creating tiny rivers that caught the fading light. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, offering him a glass with a gentle smile. The kind that reminded him so much of Rebecca. It made his heart ache in the sweetest way. Her mother's smile, warm and understanding, with just a hint of mischief around the edges. "Thanks, sweetheart." Danny took the glass, the condensation cool against his work-worn fingers. The lemonade was perfect, tart enough to make him pucker slightly, sweet enough to satisfy. He settled down on the concrete steps leading up to the garage office, and Lila joined him, their shoulders touching in that easy way that spoke of countless shared moments. The metal step was still warm from the day's heat, radiating comfort through the fabric of his worn work shirt. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their lemonade and watching the sun sink lower behind old Mrs. Henderson's maple trees across the street. The leaves rustled softly in the evening breeze, creating shadows that danced across the pavement like living things. A gentle breeze carried the smell of jasmine from somewhere nearby, mixing with the distant aroma of barbecue grills firing up for dinner. Danny felt more at peace than he had in years, as if all the broken pieces of his life had finally found their proper places. "You did good today," Lila said softly, referring to the young boy Danny had helped earlier. Marcus, a 15-year-old who'd come in angry at the world, fists clenched and eyes blazing with hurt, but left with a glimmer of hope in his eyes and a promise to return tomorrow after school. The kid reminded Danny of himself at that age, all rage and confusion with nowhere to put it. Danny swirled the ice in his glass, thoughtful, watching the cubes dance and clink against the sides. "You know, I used to think strength was about never losing," he said, his voice low and steady, each word carefully chosen. "About being the toughest guy in the room, about making sure nobody could hurt you first." He paused, taking another sip. "Now I know it's about never giving up on love, about choosing to build instead of tear down." Lila rested her head on his shoulder, her hair tickling his neck. The simple gesture spoke volumes. Of forgiveness earned through patient years. Of understanding that had grown slowly like a tender plant. Of the deep bond between father and daughter that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Her breathing was steady and calm, matching the peaceful rhythm of the evening. The sky continued its transformation, orange fading to purple at the edges like watercolors bleeding into each other. A few early stars peeked through the gathering dusk, tiny pinpricks of light that promised the full glory of a Tennessee night sky to come. Down the street, porch lights began clicking on one by one, like fireflies coming to life, each one marking a home where families were gathering for dinner, for homework, for the simple rituals that made life worth living. They watched as old Mr. Peterson walked his golden retriever past the shop, the dog's tail wagging as it sniffed at every interesting scent along the sidewalk. "Mr." Peterson waved with his free hand, calling out a cheerful, "Evening, Danny, Lila," before continuing his leisurely patrol of the neighborhood. A few cars drove by, their headlights starting to glow in the dimming light like cat's eyes in the darkness. The town was settling into its evening routine, peaceful and predictable in the best possible way. Danny felt Lila's steady breathing beside him, remembering countless evenings like this one. Homework spread across the kitchen table while he made dinner, shared meals where they talked about everything and nothing, quiet talks about her day at school, and her dreams for the future. The simple moments that made up a life, that had helped heal them both from losses that once seemed impossible to bear. These were the victories that mattered most, he realized. Not the ones won in the ring, but the ones earned through showing up day after day with love and patience. A young man couldn't have been more than 20, with eager eyes and the kind of restless energy that spoke of someone looking for direction, walked along the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets. Danny recognized him from church, one of the newer faces in the congregation who'd been coming regularly for the past few months. The young man slowed as he passed, looking at the garage with interest, taking in the clean workspace and the sense of order that spoke of honest work and careful craftsmanship. "Hey, mister." "Cole," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, full of respect and something that might have been hope. "Think you could teach me sometime? About fixing things, I mean? I could use the work, and I heard you're good with young folks who need direction." Danny couldn't help but smile, remembering his own journey from fighter to teacher, from someone who broke things to someone who put them back together. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hands that had once dealt damage now spent their days healing machines and, somehow, helping heal people too. With a playful glint in his eye, he responded, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The words that had once been a warning, delivered with dangerous intent, were now offered with warmth and humor, the tone completely transforming their meaning. Both Danny and the young man laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet street like music, blending with the cicada's song as the sky deepened to purple above them. It was a good sound, Danny thought, the sound of hope and second chances, of a community that had learned to forgive, and a man who had finally learned to forgive himself. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Danny the Bulldog Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.